More than any other generation, today's parents face challenges never imagined a generation ago. From overworked parents to underperforming schools, from threats of violence and abuse to security and safety, today's challenges can be overwhelming. So what control do parents actually have? How safe can we make our children's lives? Who is responsible for our children's education? And where can you turn for help in today's fast-paced world? Tonight, parenting pressures and the science to raising a healthy, happy child. I'm Ernie Manaus, and this is Houston 8. Joining us tonight are Jacqueline White, Interim Program Leader, Family and Consumer Sciences, Prairie View A&M University. Susan Marsh, Certified Family Life Educator, Parenting Partnership, Inc., and Dr. Candace Alfano, Associate Professor of Psychology and Director of Sleep and Anxiety Center for Kids, University of Houston. Before we start, remember you can share your thoughts throughout the show on Twitter using hashtag Houston8. And welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming in. Parenting seems to be something that can get a lot of people very worked up very quickly because of the importance of doing it correctly. But there's no manual. There doesn't seem to be anything to teach young adults today or even parents today how to prepare for this that's coming up. Why do we, strange question, why do we license drivers but not parents? I'll start with you.
I think that's a great question. We all agree that parenting is hard work, and yet when you look at the things that we do throughout the course of our day, parenting is often the thing that gets done with the least amount of strategy and the least amount of planning. And I think that there can be a belief, and it's somewhat of a romantic notion, that because we have a child and we bring them into the world or we bring them into our family, that our love for them that's so profound is going to coach us and guide us in parenting. But unfortunately, that sets up parenting to be a reactive and an emotional process, which oftentimes doesn't work. So one of the things that I often tell the parents that I work with is that they really need to approach parenting with the same level of strategy and planning and forethought that they would the other things that they do throughout the course of their day.
Yeah. Jacqueline, why do you think we've evolved to that position? Why do you think so often it is overlooked, the importance of parenting correctly?
The majority of us parent the way that we were parented. So we feel that we have that foundation, and it's overlooked that there are things that maybe our parents did that we would like to change or things of that nature. And however, as she stated, there's no manual. Parents you evolve into that role, and you don't seek the education that you may need and learn how to problem solve.
Okay, Susan, now you get the hard question here. Here we come. So Pew Research did a poll back in 2007 where they asked parents, how do you think you're doing? And basically they thought it was harder to be a parent today than it was 20 or 30 years ago. And that they think mothers by 56% are doing a worse job today than they did 20 or 30 years ago. Thoughts on that?
I think it's a point of perspective. I think we could ask parents from 30 years ago, and they would probably say, parenting was hard back then. I think that today there's so much information out there, and our society has evolved to where we think that we have to be the best. And we have to be the best parent, or super child, or I have to do better than the parent next door. My child has to be toilet trained first, or I have to have my child reading before they're 3. And so there's so many expectations that parents put on themselves that are unrealistic, and they need to get back to thinking about what's important in their own home and have more realistic expectations.
Now, I often have trouble with polls that are opinion polls because that's a particular group's theory on what they thought without any research. Mm-hmm. Do we find that parents are doing a better job today than they did in the past? And I would think they should be able to, because we have access to so much more information today, that there's the internet, as you talk about, that there seems to be a better sense of being able to find help out there in the world. But I don't know that that's actually translating to parenting. Candace, what have you found?
The word better is a tricky one for a scientist, of course.
That's true.
I think one thing that we do know is that over time there do seem to be the same types of things that are associated with negative outcomes. And I think possibly these things don't get as much attention as they should. So one thing that we know is that having open and honest conversations with your child, and that sounds like an easy thing to do, but letting your child know that they can come to you with their problems, that you're there to support them and scaffold them as opposed to scold them, will increase the likelihood that when your child is facing a difficult situation that you're going to be the one that they come to for advice and guidance. The second thing would be prioritizing education and learning and discovery. Another thing that we hear a lot about, but parents aren't always given specific strategies on how to make that happen. And this starts from the time that children are very little, setting up reading time with your child, making learning about science an important part, making it a family project. And then lastly, and this one actually sounds a little rudimentary also, but may not be as kids become adolescents, knowing where your child is at all times. Who are they hanging out with? Whose house is the party at? Who's driving them home? There's always pushback as kids get older. They want independence, but this is not a sign that parents need to become less aware of what's going on.
And often I ask this question in a follow-up to something like a statement you just said, just to clarify for our audience out there, when you say knowing where your child is, but then I think the question is, what should you be doing with this knowledge? Simply knowing, a lot of people can know what their kids are doing, and that doesn't mean it solves the problem. What should they do with knowledge?
And so then we can go back to what I mentioned before, which is planning and having forethought. So if you are not comfortable with the children that your child is hanging out with, or if you don't know if there is supervision in the home where the party is, it's perfectly appropriate to set a limit and say, you can't go, and here's why.
Right, but I think that the stress that's facing a lot of parents is, I tell my child no, it starts this fight. There's an argument. They get mad at me. They're going to hate me. I'm doing something wrong. Other parents are letting their kids go. Am I right? Am I wrong? Jacqueline, how do you find that balance?
Well, parents need to set boundaries. And one of the things that there's not always a time for negotiation. You're the parent. You're not their peer. You're not their friend. And at that moment, the child doesn't know that you're looking out and making certain that you're doing the best for them. So therefore, parents, although the child may, especially during those teenage years, there may be a lot of slamming of doors or things of that nature. However, the parent has to stand firm, and there's no negotiation. If the child is hanging with children that are not good, or the parent doesn't know that there's no supervision there, then the answer still remains no, and it's nothing wrong with saying no.
Susan, help me on this belief. I have not raised children, so I'm coming at this from what I hear. But the belief being that if you handled them correctly when they were younger, you won't have these problems when they become teens. That if you did some magic bullet was shot when they were younger, these problems wouldn't follow. True, false?
Children are going to test limits, regardless of whether they're 2 or they're 16. And so what we do as parents is start early, hopefully start early before they're slamming doors and being disrespectful to their parents, and helping children to learn respect. And they only learn respect if they're treated with respect. So to me, the cornerstone of parenting is mutual respect. And you get what you give. And so it starts at a very early age. So you prepare them for that day when they're going to get in the car with that guy or with those friends or those friends that are drinking, and teaching them to say no, but why? Helping them to develop their own moral compass, because you're not going to be with them forever. So it's a building process, and it's a process of saying no, but being able to back that up with a lesson, a life lesson. And so we talk about long-term parenting goals, and we talk about focus, maintaining your focus from the very beginning, when you first have that little baby in your arms, thinking about, where do I want my child to be at 25? And that involves those life skills that we want, because we want them hopefully employed and living a productive life, educated. But whatever that parent's values are, you begin to develop a long-term parenting goal, and you reinforce that every day in your child. Honesty, the ability to say no when it's appropriate, and also knowing that you don't always get what you want.
Okay, throwing away the research here to talk and say, right. I see my child doing this and that behavior, so I turn in on myself. I was a bad parent. I did this wrong. What could I have done better? This is my fault. What do any of you say to help parents understand when to take responsibility and when to understand that this is another life that's making its own decisions? How do they find that balance? And I'll open it to any of you.
So I think parents have to be careful not to assume that slamming doors and arguments and I hate you and you're ruining my life and, you know, all of the other things that kids tell us we're doing is a sign that somehow they're failing. I think that parents' own biases and perceptions about what the parent-child relationship is supposed to be like can set them up for failure. In any relationship, you have ups and downs, and I think as someone mentioned, you're not supposed to be your child's buddy. You're not supposed to be their friend that always says yes. So setting limits and setting rules, but explaining why you've set those rules so that there can be mutual respect and understanding that you parent not just from a place of power, but from a place of logic and concern can help to alleviate some of those concerns that I'm a bad parent because my child's mad at me.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts?
And from a practical standpoint, from a very early age, communication is so important. It's a life skill, but it's also a safety skill when you're working with your children. Like if they're going to go to someone's house and the parents aren't home, you would hope they would come back home and tell you that. And that starts very early on. And so you begin to listen to them without judging, and you set up a time, an intentional time, where you listen to your children. And one place is the dinner table, which is one area that is gone from American families today. They don't eat dinner together or any meals together.
Mm-hmm. That is so important, a parent listening to the child. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, and I remember growing up, we would talk. But that's the only way. Children will tell you a lot of information, even if you have them in the kitchen making meals with you, or while you're sitting at the dinner table with no television on, not answering the telephone, just trying to find out what was their day like, getting into the habit of asking them, how was your day? Mm-hmm. And you're not asking them as a rhetorical question, but you're truly interested in what took place, because then you learn who they're hanging out with. You learn about what happened at school, whether it was good, whether it was bad. Oftentimes children will tell off on themselves and not even realize it. But then the parent has an insight as to what he or she needs to do in order to rectify the situation.
And I love that point, if I may, about not having the TV on or not having your cell phone in your hand. Mm-hmm. Quality time means undivided attention. It doesn't mean going somewhere expensive or new or intriguing or different. It means 10 minutes of your time where the child is your sole focus and you're not the one doing the talking, but you're listening to what did their teachers say, or if they want to play their new favorite song for you. Children, everything that they do is new to them, and while it might not be to you and it might seem very ordinary as a parent, to them it's a brand new experience that if they want to share that with you, then that's a pretty good sign about your relationship.
Now, I know in families you will have multiple siblings, and you will see very different children come out of those families, and you'll see behaviors, relationships with the parents differ from child to child. What can a parent do to give the best relationship to each of the children equally? And I bring that up because I've heard parents say, each of my children is a different person. I get along with certain people better than other people. And then they carry the guilt of, not that I have a favorite, but I relate to this child better than that child. And then you see the one you relate to better maybe having a leg up in the world. Mm-hmm. What do you say to parents? I see you nodding, like you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I do. So it's true that biology accounts for awful large portion of personality and temperament. And for that reason, what we generally tell parents is that there's no one right way to parent. Your parenting style should match the child. There are some children who will be able to follow rules better, or they will be able to soothe themselves more easily when they get upset, as compared to their siblings who maybe need a little more help and the temper tantrum lasts a little bit longer. And that point of parenting that matches the child's temperament is an important one. It's not an easy one, but it's an important one.
How do you balance that out then in the family so that one child doesn't feel slated by the other? You spend more time with this child. You care more about how they feel.
You know, one thing I tell parents is that each child should feel special. And one of the things that you can do is have a date night for each child, or a special time that's set aside for what that child actually likes to do. I recall one of the parents taking their children out one by one, walking around the block every afternoon, because she got to spend quality time with that child and listen only to what that child was able to tell her during that time. And each child felt special because mom spent time with me. Or I like to go to the movies and this is what I want to see. Mom goes here with me. Or I like to play soccer and this is where we spend our time with. So you have to know your children, know their likes and their dislikes and what they're up to, and then you can better parent them. One may love cooking and baking. Make sure
Perfect. They can cook and bake for you. It works out too. There are positives in all of this.
Absolutely.
Susan, you were going to say something.
I was going to say that we have to be intentional about it. When you have more than one child, you have to be intentional and find that special time. And it really only needs to be 2 or 3 minutes a day, but you make sure during the week that you have spent some quality time with each of those children. And there are times when your children's behaviors are going to tell you that they need your attention. And so give it to them. That's just a huge payoff by just spending a few minutes giving special attention to that one child. It makes a big difference.
When you said just 2-3 minutes a day, it's almost like you could read my mind where I was going next, which is the overworked, overused time. We're overstressed today. The research, I'm looking back at my notes again on this, where in the U.S. we work longer hours than we used to. It's the longest hours we've ever worked since statistics have been kept. We put more hours into the workday, and we do more work than any other industrialized nation, the U.S. Great for us, right? Is that taking a toll on our children? We are working so much time. Do we have time? When we come home, where is our attention? How stressed are we? How overworked are we? You talk about the cell phones and having them on. How much time is the parent actually with them and not dealing with work issues? What do we do in today's world? How does all of what you're saying fit in? Boy, this is a long question, isn't it? I won't stop. I'm on a soapbox. Anyone take it.
It is a stressful time for parents, regardless of whether there's one parent working outside of the home or you have a dual income or you have families that are barely scraping by. There's stress on all levels, and that translates into less time for children. And there's that, again, that expectation that we have to have it all, we have to do it all, and so we work ourselves to death at the expense of our families. And so again, we have to get back to being intentional. So I think that the answer to your question is, and we could spend a lot of time talking about it, there is tremendous stress, and there is tremendous stress within the family, and then children are parenting themselves in a lot of cases.
I know this is probably obvious, but I just want to verify. Statistically, do we find that longer work hours, overstressed parents do lead to poorly performing children? Is that factual, or is it just something we assume?
I think there are some correlational relationships that are there. That is not something that's been proven. It's not something we can definitively say that our kids are far worse off now than they were because we work so much. A good example is that there were questions about as women started to go back into the workplace and more both parents were working full-time jobs. There were questions about, well, what is the impact on our kids to be in daycare for so many hours? Well, research has now shown that actually there really aren't significant differences between children who are home with mom all day versus children who are in daycare, that it's other things that seem to matter.
Is there a benefit to the early socialization, to having them in a group of children at a younger age so they're learning to navigate the world outside?
For some children, that really does seem to be the case, that learning those social skills and that social reciprocity early is very important for them. So again, it depends on the individual child.
Declan, I see you nodding.
No, I was agreeing with what she was stating because it is very important for kids to learn how to communicate and socialize with their peers, because we forget one thing too. They used to spend a lot of time outside playing with the kids in the neighborhood. Now most kids spend a lot of time on their video games.
This will probably upset some people even asking this question, is the online world, the internet world of socializing, the Facebooks and all of that, is that an adequate replacement for socializing with someone else? Do you learn some of the same skills? We hear so much about how negative it is, but they connect with other people and can for more periods of time. They have more access to them. Is there a positive to any of that, do we find?
There is a positive to it because we are living in a more technological era. And kids being able to communicate that way is very good. But the only problem is that when we're sitting across from each other at a dinner table and we have to use our phone to send messages and we cannot communicate effectively, and that can cause some other issues within the child's life.
And of course, we are not overstepping the dangers of internet and being online and all of that, which brings me to another issue that we really haven't talked about, but it's the violence and danger that's out there in the world today and the safety of our children. So, Susan, ideas for parents to figure out how to keep their children safer in today's world, because we're facing new problems we didn't have 10 or 20 years ago.
I think that children are exposed to adult subject matter that they weren't exposed to in the past. It's out there. And no matter how much we put and teach our parents about parental controls, children are smart. I mean, they're smarter than we are about technology. They've grown up with it. And so we have to teach them, and we have to role play. And as far as safety of all levels, be it, stranger danger, you have to teach your children, and not just teach them, but continue that conversation, continue rules, role play, and go back and role play again with your children. So what do you do if somebody asks you to get in the car with them? What are you going to do? Let's role play it. And that's very critical. And then, it still happens.
Right.
No matter what you do, it still happens. And so you have to go back to continuing that reinforcement of saying no because it's the right thing to do.
I think it's an interesting point you bring up, too, because it's one thing that I often talk to parents about when a topic like this comes up. You can restrict as much as you want. You can try and block, but they're going to encounter it. You're not going to create a safe world by cutting them off from it. So what you need to teach them, and I don't know how you do it, but how to handle these situations when you find them. So how do you handle that? When you find your children are in these situations, what do you teach them about what they're going to encounter? Candace?
Can I ask what types of situations
I'm talking
you're
about,
thinking of specifically?
as we mentioned, adult nature, things of an adult nature, of pornography and
So
sex
if they're
and
at someone's
violence.
house and that parent is showing a movie and the child knows that they're not to watch R-rated movies, what do you teach your child?
But even beyond that, too, you put a block on your computer, and the school has a block on their computer, but you're at a friend's house and they don't have that block.
Right.
These kids are going to encounter these things. So the balance of how much do you protect in the nest and how much do you teach them how to handle it in the real world?
Many of these things, unfortunately, are topics that parents don't feel comfortable talking to their children about, and I think sex is the big one. For some reason, violence is easier to talk about, but when it comes to sex, I think parents are unsure what to say or aren't sure what children should know at different ages.
Or bringing it up that it will encourage behavior.
Right, which in fact there are no data to show that is in fact true. Children will follow your lead. If you shy away from the subject, it becomes intriguing and it becomes interesting. And why doesn't my parent want to talk about it? And what is it about this topic that is so is so bad. And so you really want to be the one to demystify things for your child, as opposed to having them go to the internet or asking their friends, because they are children and they want to understand and they want to learn. To think that somehow your child is different and that you don't have to have those conversations is probably erroneous.
Yeah. Jacqueline?
Same thing, basically. Talk to your children. That's the best thing, communication. And that's one, don't shy away from any topic, any conversation, especially if the child brings it up. Then they're mystified about it, or they're intrigued about it, and they want to know. And if you don't give them the information, then they're going to go somewhere else and get it. However, they need to know what the boundaries are within the household. So if they're at the friend's house and it's an R-rated movie on, the child should know that my mom, my dad, doesn't want me to look at this. And because you set those guidelines and those boundaries and you didn't waver in them, then they have the understanding. And then if you find out that they did go there to a friend's house and watch it, then there are some things that they may need to have taken away from them. There is nothing wrong with discipline. If you go and I can't trust you, trust is the major factor. And as a child, I should be able to trust that what I've given, the instructions I've provided you as a parent, you're going to follow those.
And at that note, we have to end our conversation. I wanted to end on a rah-rah for parenting, but I'm sure we all give that. Thank you all for coming in. Now each week we invite you to visit our home online at houstonpbs.org/Houston8. There you can read about the guests, learn more about the topic, and even watch past episodes. Now next week on Houston 8, representatives from both Southwest and United Airlines join us to discuss the pros and cons of the proposed Hobby Airport expansion. That's next Friday night at 8 p.m. right here on Channel 8. And that does it for us tonight. Until next time, I'm Ernie Manous. Thank you for joining us, and a very special Mother's Day to all the mothers that are watching tonight. Good night.